Hello readers, welcome or welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about a request that I actually got a long time ago from a reader for All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven, originally published in 2015. Please note this video will have some spoilers for the book, and I also do want to give a trigger warning as the video will be discussing some graphic materials from the novel. So to begin with our overview, two high school seniors meet on the roof of their school. One of them is planning to jump and the other talks them down. From here, the two students become hesitant friends, working alongside one another on a school project where they're instructed to travel around their home state of Indiana. Through working together, they begin to see the beauty of Indiana, of life, and each other. Now to go into the plot and pacing. The narrative writing style of the story switches between the two students' different perspectives each chapter. This allows us as the reader to break through the guise each character presents and reveals their true thoughts and feelings in the moment. Overall, I thought the story was pretty fast-paced. I actually read it really quickly and only took a few breaks in between. Now to talk about the characters in the story. So our two main characters are Violet and Finch. Violet is a smart, popular girl struggling with the sudden death of her older sister, who was about to go to college. Violet was in the car with her sister during the fatal car accident, and Violet spends a lot of her time dreaming about the future and avoiding thinking of the past. Finch is a social outcast who lives in the present. He's carefree and curious, but silently is crushed by the weight of depression. Together, they help one another find joy in small things and ward off the ever-present darkness creeping on the brink of their thoughts. Now to talk about some of the major themes brought up in the story. So firstly, I want to talk about mental health and mental illness. It was a huge thread throughout the entire story, and I feel like the author was trying to illustrate a couple of things. So firstly, she's trying to show that mental illness doesn't necessarily resemble only one thing. So Violet, Finch, and some other characters within the story are all battling their own mental health struggles in different ways. And because of this point, the author also reiterates the idea that you never really know what's happening in somebody else's head. I think this is one of the biggest lessons learned by both Violet and Finch in the story as they're interacting with each other people within their lives, and also other schoolmates. The story also has some interesting perspectives on mental health resources. For instance, Violet, Finch, and some other students within their class are all going to counseling to mixed results, as we see. The second major theme that I found throughout the story was the idea of grief. For Violet, it's about the loss of her sister and the bright future that she feels was taken away too soon. She's also struggling with her own survivor's guilt, blaming herself for surviving or in some way causing the accident that her sister didn't survive. For Finch, it's much more about his childhood and some of the trauma that he experienced there. The idea that his family was ripped apart by his parents' separation, and he was seemingly never able to fully recover from that. Finch is someone who's constantly shifting personas in really dramatic visual ways throughout the story. In his mind, and the way that he kind of describes it to his friends and family, is that he's simply trying on hats. But really, I think it's a really obvious indicator that he feels really lost, he feels alone, he feels like an outcast. He clearly doesn't have a very strong sense of self, and he's looking for connection and acceptance with. So essentially, he's trying on all these personas, seeing if one will potentially fit, if someone will like him because of this new identity that he's trying on, or potentially deep down he can even fool himself and ultimately like himself based on this identity that he's creating. I also want to quickly note that I saw the author was saying that in some ways the story was semi-autobiographical, where she essentially encountered multiple losses in her life during a time when she was really young. This story could even be a kind of cathartic outlet for the author to try and potentially release some of her grief or pent-up emotions from this traumatic experience that she lived through. So now to talk about some of the good and bad elements of the story. So to start out with the good, I think that Overall, the depiction of depression in the story felt very relevant. I felt as if the author really understood experiences surrounding mental illness, and I was really impressed by that, as mental illness and depression in general is found in so many different ways. It's not something that's really easy to pin down or discuss and describe for a couple different reasons. Number one, primarily, again, it affects people differently. It looks different for different people, but also societally, as really a global society, I think we've stigmatized mental illness and depression so much that it's not something that's easy for people to talk to in that way either. The second thing I really liked about the story was the characters are actually really likable for the most part, and I felt like the writing was pretty light, or tried to kind of have a levity to it, which is a bit contrasting to the subject matter that's being discussed. Now to talk about some of the bad. So I kind of couldn't help but feel like at times the author was glamorizing some aspects of mental illness, even though I just praised the way that she's describing depression. And I also said the tone in some ways is really kind of lighthearted. At the same time, there was something that just felt off to me in a way that I honestly can't quite put my finger on, but that's really just kind of my gut reaction and how I felt when reading it. And the second point is that while I think it's extremely important that as a society we truly have a duty to discuss these heavy but very real topics, I also think that, especially someone like an author of a YA novel, I think it's super critical that we're also very careful and responsible about how we're depicting these things, because we know that they're going to be consumed by young people who are the most susceptible to really kind of honing in on certain elements of the story and maybe trying to apply it to their own life or their own experience, or getting into potentially an unhealthy mind space of comparisons that really should not be happening. And so with that point, I personally felt like some of the subject matter was written in a way that maybe was not needed, potentially just too graphic, too almost trying to be like shocking or get a reaction out of you. And when I was reading it, I honestly didn't really like have an emotional reaction in terms of feeling necessarily like extremely sad or even shocked or anything, because I kind of saw where the direction of the story was going, wanting to kind of be done with it, and almost a feeling of feeling kind of sick at the way things were being described and the direction of the story. So now to go into my final thoughts. Definitely, it's not something I see myself revisiting. To me, this book wasn't like emotional and beautiful. It just felt depressing, and it's something I'm really glad that I didn't read as a teenager, because I feel like it may have been even more damaging to me at that age, personally. In general, I really don't enjoy this subject matter. I don't enjoy stories that have elements that this story has in it. And I'm not exactly sure who I would honestly recommend this to. It wasn't a bad novel, but I just didn't enjoy it. Given that it's YA, I wouldn't really recommend this to young people to read, but potentially some people would really like it. So that's kind of my thoughts. I know I was really subjective in this review, but I just wanted to be honest and kind of transparent about how I felt when I was reading it. I'm super curious though. I know this book was actually pretty popular and even got a Netflix movie made out of it. So I'm really curious if anybody is familiar with this story, if anybody read it, potentially really enjoyed it, or maybe you didn't enjoy it. I'd love to know kind of what your thoughts were if you want to leave a comment below. Thanks everybody so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.